Okay. So we have the three impure klipot, the three impure shells in which the godliness cannot be extracted from and infused within the items that are associated with the three impure klipot. And then we have the higher form of klipot that's defined as klipat noga, the translucent shell, or sitra achra, which is the other side of holiness. And the difference between them, as we discussed, was that the shalosh klipot, the three impure klipot, are realities, are energies, are creatures, beings that Hashem creates in such a way that they totally lock up their inner divine essence, meaning they don't allow for it to be because everything, of course, like all realities, these realities receive a soul from Hashem, their vitality, their life from God. But these concealing shells are so thick, they're so dark, that it doesn't allow for the true inner identity to be revealed, to be extracted from it. And then in the klipat noga, on the other hand, that's the translucent shell, that's the clear shell. And although this too is also a reality that conceals and obscures the godliness, it doesn't proclaim the truth of every reality, which is that its sole inner identity really is part of the divine reality, and that the sole purpose of its creation should mirror the divine and reflect its divine creator. Although it doesn't speak that truth and it conceals that truth, nevertheless, this type of shell, it allows for human beings who can view this and operate and interact with this category to penetrate and infuse this category with godliness and to extract the inner sparks that exist within them. And therefore, not only are we allowed to interact with these things, but most of our life is spent interacting with this category. And this is all things that are permissible, just not necessarily holy. And how we utilize them determines where its energy will end up. And that's up to us. The human being can come to either reveal its inner identity, reveal its inner beauty, and move it over the energies onto the side of holiness, transform it from being klipa into holiness, or the opposite. And this is the relationship that we have, depending on the type of klipa that it is, the relationship that man is expected to have with it. Concerning the shalosh klipot, the three impure klipot, what's our relationship with it? Avoidance. To refrain from interacting with that. But concerning the klipat noga, the translucent, the neutral klipa, we have the ability to elevate it into the realm of holiness by using it out as a vehicle, as an instrument to serve God. Revealing its inner identity, its inner purpose, penetrating that shell and allowing the holiness to be penetrated within these levels.
Rabbi, I had from last time that the 365 negative commandments would be under this category of klipas, whatever.
The shalosh klipot, yeah. The three impure klipot.
Right. So you say that basically those are bad, but I think that we're able to, on Yom Kippur, we're able to atone for those. Is that correct?
So we'll talk
a different thing.
So we'll talk about Teshuvah and atonement today. Okay. We'll get to this, and in the upcoming chapters, yes.
Okay.
What happens after the fact, and now we're talking about before the fact. Before the fact, we have the responsibility to engage with the neutral klipot in a positive way, and we have a responsibility to try to avoid engaging with the three impure klipot. We'll talk about what happens when we do. And who is it dependent on that determines the outcome of where the energy that's involved in the engaging in worldly things, where it will end up? That's dependent on us. This depends on how we use these klipot, these energies. The human being, we're the only creature that has moral choice, we also have the choice of how to use and interact with these klipot. If we use it for something good, something godly, something holy, then what we accomplish, again, is to introduce the reality of oneness and perfection of Hashem into this interaction. And we pull the klipa up, we elevate it beyond its own limitations, and we make it, and recognizing that it's part of the God is one, Hashem Echad experience, connecting it to its truth. However, if we approach the klipot and use it for something not godly, then what do? Here's what the Alter Rebbe says. This is everything until now we've discussed in the previous chapters. Here's what the Alter Rebbe introduces to us in this chapter. An interesting idea. So if everything we interact with, think about it, look at it like this. So there's a certain energy that exists in this cup of water. There's an energy that exists in me preparing to pour the cup of water, an energy in me drinking the water. All of that energy, when I'm engaged in this activity, imagine preparing a meal, a full meal, and all the work that goes, a big Shabbos meal, and all the work that goes into it, all the effort that goes into it, that's energy. So energy is being utilized here. And the energy always has to find a home, it goes somewhere. And then there's the food itself, the energy that exists within the food. They're taking the car to the store. There's so many parts involved in preparing this big meal I'm going to have. We say is like this. So assuming that everything in this meal is permissible, then if I utilize this meal out for holiness, if it's a Shabbos dinner, or it's to bring the family together, or I'm going to eat this food and then use that energy to go do a mitzvah, what have I done? I've taken out all of the energy from that entire experience, the energy that I used, the effort that I put into it, right? Everything requires certain energy, certain vitality. If a person doesn't have any energy, they can't do anything. So when you're like using fuel, all of that energy, all of that vitality that you use and that exists within the food and within the effort, it has to go somewhere. So if it's used for holiness, it gets placed into the realm of holiness, of Kedusha, and I've elevated that entire experience, and actually there I fulfilled my purpose of creation, which is to draw godliness down into the world and further the God is one notion, that all of this is a part of the godly experience. There's another option. The other extreme is we don't use this meal out for holiness. We put it on the table and we use it and we're gossiping and we then use the fuel that we have and we go out to do things that are not appropriate, and it becomes a very inappropriate, sin is involved somehow. What happens? All of the energy then gets moved to the shalosh klipot hatameot, the three impure energies, and we've just fueled that. We'll discuss that soon, what that does and how serious of an act that is. But what if you just eat the food for the sake of the food? You don't do anything that's holy, you don't do anything that's godly, but you're not doing anything that's sinful. You're just having a meal. The energy has to go somewhere. Because you've used all this energy and you've extracted the energy from the food, you've pulled it all out, because the klipa energy, we said, can be extracted. So now you're pulling out all this energy and all the effort that you put into this meal. That energy now is sort of misplaced. You can't move it over to the side of holiness because you're not using this meal out for holiness, for godliness, for spirituality, for positivity. So the Alter Rebbe says in this chapter, tells us a novel, a chiddush, an idea, which is that temporarily this energy gets moved to the side of the three impure klipot as well. And you now infuse the three impure klipot with all of the energy from this experience.
That's a bad thing.
It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad thing. But there's always the bad news and there's the good news. What's the good news? The good news
You can move it back.
is that because it's not fully invested in the three impure klipot, because you didn't do anything that was forbidden, so it doesn't get trapped up into the three impure klipot, it's very easily extractable, elevatable. If that's a word, or it's not a word, but
It's a good word.
you can retroactively remove it easily from the three impure klipot to the side of holiness. How do you do that? Teshuvah. But not a very intense level of teshuvah. A very, very, I wouldn't say very, very, an easy level of teshuvah, light teshuvah. Why? What is teshuvah? Teshuvah is to return. So you want to return the energy to its source, to its true source and goodness and godliness and holiness. But because it didn't get so far pulled into the darkness, it doesn't require such a huge amount of effort to return it back to godliness. So what's an example of how to, after the fact, pull it back out? So first is, I say, wait a second. I just spent so much time, so much effort preparing for this meal. We had such a good opportunity to make this a positive experience, to do the blessings and to sit around the table discussing good things. And we didn't. It was very neutral, this whole experience. But it was such a good opportunity, a lost opportunity. So then you have a little bit of remorse, of regret of how you acted. I'm a Jew. I have an opportunity to bring out the oneness of God into every experience. I could have very easily infused godliness into the equation here, talking about good things, positive outcomes, using the energy from this meal to go do something good. Maybe I had leftovers. Instead of throwing it in the garbage, we could have offered it to help somebody. Whatever it is, it's not very, very difficult to infuse goodness into this experience. So I have a little bit of remorse and regret, and then the next time I have a meal, I have that intent to use out this experience for goodness, for godliness, for spirituality, for positivity. What do? Not only do I elevate that experience, I drag with it the previous permissible experiences that were misused. And that goes not just with food. It goes with any type of permissible experience that you didn't use out for the service to God. It's sitting there waiting to be elevated, to be pulled out, simply by this level of teshuvah of change of perspective, recognizing that I could have done better. I didn't do anything wrong necessarily. I didn't do anything bad, but I could have done better. I could have used this to further enhance my connection with God or my family or helped other people, and I didn't. And because of that, the next time I go about it in a little bit of a different way, I retroactively remove those previous experiences, even 20 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was. I remove it to the side of holiness. Another example is using your car. Every time you get in the car and just do it for things that are permissible, I say, wait a second. It's such a good opportunity to use this vehicle out as a vehicle for goodness. What I'm thinking about when I'm driving in the car, the conversations that I have, the podcast, the music that I'll listen to, whatever it is. And then I think about the times that I didn't. So I have a little bit of remorse, regret, and I say, for the future, I want to do things differently. The next time I get in that car, I go with that exciting, I have a hop in my step. I'm going to use this out for a positive experience. What do? I retroactively elevate all of that energy that was pushed down into the three impure klipot. I pull it out and move it to the side of holiness.
So we can do a forensic accounting of our lives and do it from one side to another.
That's what Yom Kippur is. It's forensic accounting for the previous year. And sometimes if when you have a Yom Kippur that you didn't cover, maybe sometimes you got to cover the previous 5 years, 10 years. But throughout life we have these accountings that we do, and to think about all of those lost opportunities and how to elevate them. And in the system of the Torah, it makes it very easy to do it with permissible things, because again, we didn't do anything forbidden, sinful. We just didn't do good. And so therefore the process of elevating it is quite is much easier than, say, sin, as we'll get to momentarily.
So this is more related to the positive commandments.
This is related to
Just didn't do.
This is related to almost, like anything in life.
Okay.
Anything you interact with, which you can move it to the side of holiness. A phone call. You're having a phone call just to talk about a few different things that are very practical. A simple, hey, how are you? How was your day? That elevates the conversation to a place of goodness. And if you don't do this, you know what? I always speak to this person. Why don't I say, hi, how are you? Why don't I ask them how they're doing? Why don't I break past this reality in which there are things that are separate from God and there are things that are not separate from God, and recognizing that nothing is separate from God. I have an opportunity to infuse and elevate every aspect of my life with holiness, with positivity.
So as our awareness emerges, our godliness, does it retroactively alter the past?
Yes. As your experiences become greater, you then look back and you say what you could have done, and then you elevate the past in a greater way.
Is there anything that can't be elevated other than like trade?
Anything that is not, that goes against Torah cannot be elevated. And therefore we refrain from it. But we'll talk about the three impure klipot in a moment. So then we went from the bad news to the good news, back to the bad news. It's not such bad news, but the Alter Rebbe says that he adds one point at the end of this conversation. He says that though teshuvah, this light level of teshuvah, can correct the spiritual direction of the act, right? It went there, we can move it back here. It does not mean that the act left no imprint at all. There is some aspects that remain, because the food in this example didn't remain outside of you. It entered into your body, it becomes part of your flesh, your blood. So even after the spiritual energy is elevated, the experience of using the body as a instrument for selfishness, for doing things just because you wanted to engage with them, it leaves a mark on the body and on the soul, and a certain residue remains. And the Alter Rebbe calls this a reshimu. This is like an impression, a mark, a trace, a lingering imprint, a leftover effect. The act is over, but the person has changed. The food gave him vitality. The body still carries an echo, some traces of an echo of these acts. It's like if you think about if you light a candle in a room or you burn some incense. So after the smoke is gone, the smell is still there, like in the fabric, in the walls, in the room. If something greasy, you could clean it off, but there is some element that remains still within the paper, within the residue, whatever it is. And the same is true over here, is that the main spiritual energy can be reversed, but the bodily involvement leaves this subtle imprint. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says the body, or the soul, really, after 120, after we pass on, requires a purification process. And in the English vernacular, this would be called hell. Yeah, we go through, this is purgatory, where we go through a process of cleansing the soul from the imprint that remained even on the permissible things. It's called this type, and there's a different, throughout the time, I'll talk about a few different levels of the purification process that the body, or the soul, experiences. This particular one is called chibut hakever. It's called purgatory of the grave. And he's not trying to say this as a punishment. Others do use this as a punishment. If you do this, you're going to be punished by this. Alter Rebbe doesn't take that approach. It's not revenge or a punishment. He says it's simply the body undergoing the final, the soul undergoing the final purification process. There's the cleansing of the traces that accumulated throughout the physical life, and the soul returns to God. But what the person may have done teshuvah, and the misused energy could be elevated. But the soul still needs the refinement, the cleansing of the impression, the reshimu that was left by having served as a vehicle for klipa.
That's when we die? Or?
Yes.
So is this something that Chevra Kadisha deals with, that they do?
No, this is a spiritual thing that happens with the soul. It's not a physical thing that we do. A spiritual thing that happens, that it goes through some kind of cleansing process. This is part of the 11 months of St. Kaddish, getting the soul ready. The final descent is after the 1 year. So the soul goes through certain things to go through a process of refinement.
So it's only for the soul, it's got nothing to do with the body.
Correct. Because of what the body did, and the soul is in the body. And so this teaches us something very important about the Tanya's view of the human being, is that the acts that you do are not insignificant. What you physically do matters, and a person cannot say that now my intentions are good, nothing happened. No, something did happen. The body was involved, the nervous system, the habits, the appetites, the physical life becomes shaped by these behaviors, and Teshuvah heals the relationship with Hashem. It restores that spark, that all that energy, vitality that went to the 3 impure klipot, but it leaves a mark that requires purification. This is what we think about to recognize that. So therefore, in our interactions, doesn't mean to stop doing what we're doing. Continue doing what you're doing, the permissible things, the things that are allowed. Continue going to the supermarket and charging your car and getting gas and having meals. But infuse those simply with a little bit of holiness, a little bit of goodness, if you're not already doing so. And if you are doing so, a little bit more so. And then those acts don't leave any negative imprint or effect on the soul at all. In fact, the opposite. The entire experience from the outset, from the beginning, is a godly, holy experience fulfilling our purpose. So again, we'll recap this and move on to the second stage. So the process is this: a permitted object used selfishly, permissibly, but selfishly, meaning just for the sense of self, not for godliness, for holiness, descends temporarily to the 3 impure klipot. Teshuvah can lift it back up because it's never essentially forbidden. It didn't get locked into the 3 impure klipot, but because it enters the body and became a part of the person, a small trace remains, and that requires this purification process. And that's what the Alter Rebbe refers to as chibut hakever, the purification of the grave.
So every action that I do, I need to have intention, a pure intention for it.
Yeah.
If I don't have intention, it's
Then temporarily, as long as it's permitted, then temporarily it gets moved to 3 impure klipot. You've fueled it. You've given energy and vitality to the dark side. We'll talk about what that means soon. But you could easily move it back over with having future intention, except it leaves a little bit of a throughout the life. And it's not. We're not saying this as like, oh my gosh, this is having
scar or something.
a huge scar. We're saying everyone goes through this because all of us, we're physical human beings. We engage in things, permissible things. Sometimes we just enjoy a meal for the meal, and we're make a phone call just for the sake of a phone call, or you book a flight just for the sake of booking a flight, and we don't have that intention. So what he's saying is, it does leave an imprint, but don't be so distraught by the fact that it leaves an imprint. There's something we can do about it. It's called chibut hakever, and it takes place after we pass away. And it doesn't mean the soul appreciates that. It's considered a purgatory of sorts, but the soul appreciates it after the fact, allowing the soul to have the full healing process.
It just seems like since your soul is anyways going to have to get cleaned,
Might as well.
you're getting cleaned regardless. So like the level of how much you refine.
You're saying like enjoy, like people before Yom Kippur are saying, "How Yom Kippur anyways?
I'm just
let's
saying,
let's
like-
get in, baby." You know.
You're working so hard to be intentional about every single action in your life. You're gonna have to go through this process regardless. Is there a level?
For sure. Every time it leaves a bit of an imprint. So the
that
bigger
imprint
the
is gonna be really big if you just
or many small imprints, I don't know exactly, but every time you do it, it impacts the body more and more. Person, then think about it. Every act that you do, the more and more a person does it, the more he gets pulled into that, he gets affected by that. Same as spiritually. A person that just goes, does something that's just random or not, it's not bad, but it's not good. The more and more he does it, the more that becomes a part of his identity. So the same is true with the soul as well. That's number one. Number two is that each and every time, forget about what happens after. Right now, every time I engage in a conversation, I have an opportunity to do something magnificent, which is to infuse godliness into this experience. So forget about what I did 12 years ago, or 2 years ago, or last week, or yesterday, or 1 minute ago. Right now, just in and of itself, I have such an opportunity to bring godliness and to bring holiness into this moment. And that's why the world was created. That's why all this exists, in order to create the godly reality within this space, in this place that seems otherwise void of godliness. And that's our job, to bring the light of God into that. And I can do that. So every moment, forget about what happens if I don't. Think about it in a positive way, what I can do in this moment with the right intention and with the right not just intent, but with the right behavior and with the right approach. All right, let's move on. Now we turn to the shalosh klipot. This is the realm of complete impurity, and what happens when a person engages in things that are forbidden. So when a person becomes involved in these acts, forbidden things, the divine, remember we said everything, there's that energy. So you're using a certain energy. There's energy that exists within the cup, the very cup that's used, the table. And we'll go back to that meal. So much energy is involved, so much goes into everything that we do. What happens is that energy gets funneled, fueled into the 3 impure klipot, the shalosh klipot, and it becomes trapped there, and it cannot be elevated. And it remains bound in these klipot, the Alter Rebbe says, until quote, the future time when evil itself will be abolished from the world. He says when death will be swallowed up forever. What's death? Death is klippas, impurity, darkness. When it gets swallowed up, in the times of Mashiach, there will be no more darkness and death. I'll be able to go and take back all of that energy. But until then, the energy is stuck and it's bound within the 3 impure klipot, the sparks of holiness. All of the energy that was used are imprisoned there until they'll finally be set free in the times of Mashiach. And every sin injects life and energy into that which opposes godliness. It's not simply that a person failed. I messed up. You've taken living spiritual energy and you've handed it over to the other side that fights holiness, that opposes holiness. It's as though a person is entrusted with a precious and powerful gift, a tool that can be used to build, to heal, to bring light into the world. And instead of using it out for this purpose, he places it into the hands of the enemy, who can then use it as a weapon to attack you, attack everything that's good, a destructive force. And that's what sin does. It arms the opposition. God created the opposition, yes, and he says it needs to exist, but we decide how much energy it has. And every time we do something that is sinful, we fuel it and we give it more tools in order to further spread its agenda of darkness, of hatred, of oppression, of destruction. And obviously it's a very heavy thought, because it means that sin is not only weakness, failure, but it's a transfer of energy. It's taking the strength of the soul, the gifts of life, the capacity that God gives us, the energy that exists within physical things that could be used out for the sake of godliness, and allowing them to service the concealment, to be used by the concealment, by the spiritual darkness. And in these cases, it gets trapped in there and stuck in there, so it can't simply be pulled back, like the other, what we just described above. You do a light level of teshuvah and you extract it. It's been hijacked. It's taken by the other side. The weapon remains in the enemy's hands, so to speak, until the day that Mashiach comes and evil itself is stripped of its power. So now you can go back in and you could take it. And only then can you capture or retrieve what was captured. And the Alter Rebbe says a person should think about this. It's obviously a heavy thought, but it's an important thought. Referring here to intentional sin. A person that does something without the proper awareness and knowledge, that's not what we're discussing here. We're talking about intentional sin, engaging in sinful acts intentionally. It carries a consequence that's far beyond the act itself, the moment itself. It means you've taken something holy, which is yourself and your tools and your everything about you and the articles and things that are around you, the resources around you, and you've turned them not only to not use them for holiness, but you've turned them against holiness. Taking something that is meant to reveal godliness and made it serve as a concealment for godliness instead. And this realization, if we indeed think about that, and we spend a few moments pondering that, not at all to lead to a sense of heaviness and sadness and depression, no, but a sense of direction and perspective going forward, then it awakens a deep sense of responsibility and a seriousness for every single action that we do and what reaction is caused by that behavior, from that behavior. And it remains stuck there until the end of days when Mashiach comes. With one exception. There's one exception. I'll quote from the words of the Tanya, O ad sheyaseh tshuva gedola kol kach shezdonot naselo kezachiot mamash. To translate, he says, and this is one of the most amazing ideas in all of Torah, one of the most amazing ideas described in this chapter of Tanya, life transformative, literally transformative, as I'll say in a moment. There is a level of tshuva that can be done, called Teshuvah Gedola or Teshuvah Ava Rabba, with great love, that actually converts the previous sins into merit, into mitzvot, and he uses the word mamash, which means literally, not figuratively, literally. And only if I reach that level of tshuva can I retroactively elevate the sparks that were previously trapped into the shalosh klipot hatmeot, the three impure klipot. When the sinner repents in the manner that we'll describe presently, the sparks of holiness don't remain in the clutches of the klipot until the end of days, but instead they could be freed and restored to holiness even here and now. How so? When a person repents so wholeheartedly that his premeditated intentional sins become transformed into merits themselves, into virtues themselves, into mitzvot themselves, literally. And he gets this from the Gemara. It's based on the Gemara, which it talks about there are two levels of tshuva. One is tshuva out of fear or awe, and the other is tshuva out of love. And the person who does tshuva out of fear, which is typical tshuva, is I'm afraid, I'm kind of worried about what's going to happen to me. I got to think about my afterlife and my blessings in my life. So it's typically there's a level of fear or awe involved in our tshuva. It's not bad. It's a great type of tshuva. What that does is that has the power that you can be forgiven for your previous misdeeds, and that's what you were referencing earlier, Yom Kippur. Is that a level of tshuva, not as basic as the one described earlier, but a level of tshuva called tshuva miyira, tshuva out of awe or fear, has the power to be forgiven, that God forgives you for your previous sins. Now, in that level, I don't transform them into merits. They're simply like, in a sense, God washes away what was done and the punishment that the person would have otherwise received.
So as if they didn't exist.
In a sense, as if they didn't exist. The act itself, but the sparks, because of that, because the energy was trapped in the three impure klipot, even though the act itself is forgiven, as if they don't exist, the sparks still remain trapped and lodged into the three impure klipot. Only until Mashiach comes will they be extracted. That's for the tshuva out of yira, out of awe or fear. But if the person does tshuva out of ava, out of love, and he says ava rabba, an intense love, a great love, then something much deeper occurs. Those very sins can actually be turned into merits. Now, this idea doesn't seem to make any sense. It sounds preposterous. It's shocking. We could understand being forgiven. We can understand getting a second chance. But how can something wrong become something positive? It's an example of a child does something that's very disturbing, very wrong, and the child comes to the parent, and out of either fear or out of awe, of like, what have we done, begs the parents for forgiveness. The parents could say that we're good. We're good. You're okay. It's been forgotten. And eventually they do forget. But that's not what we're saying. We're taking it one step further, but much further, drastically different, is to say that the misdeeds, that the negative energy itself can retroactively be transformed into a mitzvah, into a virtue, into a merit. How can something like this happen? So the Alter Rebbe explains. He says that sometimes a person becomes so broken by how far they drifted from Hashem that feeling itself creates the thirst, the desire to come back, to return. And he longs for God now with a desire, with a passion, with a feeling that he never had before. It's like, imagine a person who's nearly dying of thirst in the desert, and when he finally finds water, he values it way more than someone that had water the whole time ever could. And that's the difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva. The tzaddik was always close to Hashem, was always close to God. But the Baal Tshuva knows what it means to be far away. And because of this, his return could be even more intense, that now he's head and shoulders above the level of a tzaddik, because he experienced the distance, and that reunion is so much stronger than the union. To just be always connected is one thing, but to feel that sense of separation and to reconnect, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like the child coming home after the child's been away, he's been distant. That's the most intense feeling. And that's why the rabbis say, in the place, b'makom shebalei tshuva omdim, in the place that balei tshuva stand, even complete tzaddikim cannot stand. It's a powerful line. Even complete tzaddikim cannot stand in the place of the Baal Tshuva, of the penitent. So how do the sins become merits? Because the very sin led the person, caused the person, triggered the person to wake up, to change his life or her life, and to come back to Hashem with a much greater love than would have been there even before. So in that sense, the fall itself becomes the reason for an even greater return. So now I look back, was that act a good thing? It certainly led to this goodness that exists now. And that's the retroactive power of this intense level of tshuva. That you become so much closer. Why? Not because of all the good in your life, all the mitzvot you did. The opposite. You become so much closer because of the distance that you experienced in your life. Because of the sin, the feeling of darkness and separation, that feeling of separateness sparks the deep desire to feel close to return. If you ever sent I'm sure some of you have, and some of you one day will, sending a child to overnight camp. And the days before, the relationship with the child is like, of course, it's like it always is. It's great. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's, eat your dinner, why do you leave a mess, clean up, and there could be tension, but it's regular. The child goes away to overnight camp, and suddenly both the parents and the child, they feel this deep desire to reconnect and just want to see the child, just want to embrace the child. Especially when the child calls and says, Mommy, Daddy, I want to come home, I want to see you. So what do we have here? That the very distance, the very separation sparks the desire for connection.
But what's the difference between fear and love? Like doing the act.
Because very good question. So the tshuva from fear is not the deep desire to be one and close with you. It's more about me and what's going to happen to me in the afterlife. What if I'm going to receive any punishments for what I'm doing? So it's not driven by that just intense connection between parent and child. And therefore it doesn't spark that closeness. So I don't retroactively change the past. I just want to wipe it away and I'm good. I want to you forgive me and we're good. But the power of coming home, the power of the distance it is the distance itself. It's the sin itself that causes the desire to return, and therefore it gets transformed. I want to elaborate a little bit more on this idea. So a sin is you're not just breaking a rule, you're not just sinning. It also wounds the soul. And just as a person could be hurt physically or emotionally, a person could also be hurt spiritually. And the Tanya teaches us to take the soul seriously. And the soul is real. And when a person lives in a way that's not consistent with the soul, that's disconnected or destructive, then something inside of him or her is damaged. And Teshuvah is God's gift of healing. Allows the soul to heal. And it means to return, to come back who you truly are. To restore your life, restore your soul to its natural beauty, to its natural clarity, to this wholeness. And at first, healing means becoming free from the damage. That's the first stage to healing. Not allowing the previous abuse, the previous damage to impact me the way it once did. Now, the pain in that case is still very much a part of the story, but it no longer controls the person. And that itself, so imagine a person, God forbid, goes through some kind of abuse. So there are two stages to the healing. One is to not allow that abuse to take hold of you, to control you. And that takes tremendous work, tremendous honesty, there's grief, there's courage, and effort. And if the person reaches that stage, that would be on the same level as the Teshuvah Meira, the lower level of Teshuvah, described here.
What is that called? Teshuvah what?
Meira, out of awe. There's a they've recovered from the abuse that it doesn't take hold of them and control them. And these people are heroes, people that have experienced physical or mental or emotional abuse, because the amount of work and effort requires to not allow that to be the defining story of your life, to not allow it to control you, and not allow it to impact other relationships, and to overcome that is tremendous. But it doesn't transform the past into good. That negativity is still very much a part of the story, and there's still a lot of trauma associated with that negativity in that past. But sometimes the healing can go even deeper. And a person who experiences abuse, they can reach a place that the very struggle that once hurt them becomes the reason that he grows into someone deeper, more honest, more sensitive, more successful, more connected than they would have been without ever experiencing that abuse. Why? Because it creates this it creates the damage that requires him to work on fixing himself, and through that process, he reaches a heights that he never would have experienced without that. That doesn't mean the struggle itself was good. We're not saying that. But looking back, that person could say, because of that challenge, I was able to reach a depth that I never would have otherwise reached. And in that sense, you gain a retroactive meaning to the past. There's a term for this. They have it called narrative therapy. Is that today, if you're properly putting things into perspective, you can retell the narrative and to recognize that those things actually led you to become who you are today. And therefore, there are rare circumstances, and this is to be the ultimate sort of example of this, is where the person who is experienced abuse will tell his abuser, thank you. Now, it never justifies the person who, God forbid, abuses. We're not saying that. But a person who was abused will say, thank you. Why? Because I never would have become who I am today without experiencing that. That pain, that challenge brought out some kind of my inner depth that would have never been brought out. I would have been like everyone else. We would have been satisfied with good. But the greatness becomes extracted through the challenge, through the difficulty. And if you can reach that level, then what are you doing? You're reframing retroactively what took place, and there is a underlying goodness because that negativity itself became the springboard for this newfound power that a person has. And that's the idea of Teshuvah mi'ava. The sin itself was wrong. The distance from Hashem was painful and destructive, but if that very distance leads to a much deeper sense of longing, a much deeper honesty, a much deeper closeness to Hashem, which impacts you and changes who you are, then the fall itself becomes retroactively a very important part of the story. It becomes the springboard for connection. And what was once dark and considered a fall, now it's transformed into the force that helped create a new bond. An example of imagine a home that takes just a very simple example, a home that there's some damage. There's damage in the house. And in and of itself, it's not a good thing. But now imagine that damage, it leads to the ability to have, finally you want to do the work that you were planning on doing for so many years. Or you find something in the walls, I don't know. But something good comes from that. Now when you tell the story, it's not, oh my gosh, my house was damaged or something was destroyed. What is it? It's that my house being destroyed led to a deep finding, led to something so positive, so great. So retroactively, that damage, there's a goodness associated with it because it becomes a very springboard. And another way to relate to this, I think we can all relate to it if we think about this. If you think about a life experience, not one that you're currently going through, hopefully this perspective can help, but think of a personal challenge that you went through and you overcame it. And at the time, it's painful and it's unwanted and it can be deeply confusing and difficult. Was the challenge itself good? So now the answer to that question depends. It depends on the impact that it had. If you can say about that challenge, that because of that challenge, which I think we all have those in our lives, that because of that challenge, we became stronger, deeper, more humble, more real, more connected, and we would never have reached perhaps that level and that part of ourselves without that challenge, then it adds deep meaning to that struggle. Another example of this is in a relationship, like marriage, for example. When everything is smooth and beautiful, it's wonderful, great, beautiful. That's like the relationship of a tzaddik, between a tzaddik and God. It's great, it's bliss. Closeness comes naturally. But sometimes a real relationship goes through tension, goes through struggle, goes through pain, and in and of itself, that tension is not good. But if the couple does the hard work, and if they become more honest, more vulnerable, more committed, and more willing to change, then the relationship can become deeper than it ever was before. And what led to this new depth? The very tension itself, the struggle itself. So in hindsight, retroactively, when you look back, narrative therapy, it's in the Tanya sense, the tension becomes the cause of something greater. And the same is true in a much deeper way with our relationship with Hashem. And that's why the rabbis tell us, again, that the place where the Baal Teshuvah stands, for the person who reconnected and came home and returned to God where he stands, even the complete tzaddik cannot stand. And the tzaddik is close to Hashem, for sure. But the Baal Teshuvah, the one who comes home, he knows what it means to be far. He knows what it means to be in overnight camp and feeling distant, and feeling lonely, and feeling so separate, full of fear. And because of that, they carry a depth, a thirst, a passion that would have never existed otherwise. So tshuva me'ava, tshuva out of this intense love, it means that the distance itself becomes the cause for the deeper closeness. Not that the sin was good, but that feeling of distance and separation, again, becomes the springboard for real return. Then what does it do? It leads to the transformation of those negative deeds into positive ones. And what happens when that occurs? It releases them from being trapped within the klipa. Why? Because they're no longer sins. They're mitzvot. Because they became part of the process of the healing, and not only part of the process, the springboard, the very reason why you're experiencing the closest you have today. Unbelievable idea.
Is what being released, is it a retroactive process, or is it just simply related to that original sin? Yeah, to the sin.
Retroactive to the original.
To that.
That
sin that you did, and everything that simply got trapped because of that particular sin.
Yes. So you bring up a good point. So that can be either life transformative tshuva, that I just changed my entire life, and it removes all of the previous energies into the side of holiness. And in that case, the tzaddik's got nothing on you, because you have not only all the good things that you've done, you've had all that negativity that you've transformed. Or it can be tshuva in a particular aspect of your life, where there's one area where you struggled with, you've experiencing challenges with, and you do tshuva in that particular sense, and in that area, in that arena, I extract the energy through this intense level of tshuva that we could all experience. It's difficult because we have an ego and we have the animal soul to contend with, but we can all achieve this level of tshuva. And the good thing is, once you do that once, that's it. You've pulled it out. You've retroactively pulled it all out. What happens tomorrow then is doesn't change what you've been able to transform retroactively. And I just want to add, because if you read the chapter, you'll see there's a whole element that we didn't discuss explicitly, but we discussed all the ideas that the Alter Rebbe in this chapter does give a lot of examples in the realm of sexuality or intimacy. And he says that he in all of these examples that he gave examples from that as well. Because obviously dealing with that kind of morality or that type of holiness is something that is a very humanistic element. And so just very briefly, in the realm of, there's the realm of holiness, how intimacy can be seen as the holiest thing, closeness between husband and wife, and obviously the birth of a child as a result, the growing of a family. And then it can be, on the other side, intimacy can be inappropriate and forbidden and sinful. And what that does is it degrades, denigrates, and it creates a tremendous amount of negative energy to the three impure klipot. And then you have intimacy that's permissible but not necessarily holy in the same thing. Temporarily that intimacy, the energy and the vitality gets placed into the three impure klipot, but it can be elevated after the fact with the level of tshuva, using intimacy out for the sake of holiness, of connection, as opposed to selfishness. And that's something that the Alter Rebbe adds. And with the last, with 1 minute here, I want to just kind of recap this chapter, because a lot discussed here. So first we mentioned the idea, or mentioned the idea of the two types of klipot. Klipat nogaz, the neutral energy, which can be elevated. And then you have the shalosh klipot tatmeot, that's in the realm of full impurity, cannot be immediately elevated now. When a person uses something permissible selfishly, like kosher food just for indulgence, then its energy temporarily is dragged down into the three impure klipot. But because it was never inherently forbidden, nothing sinful was done here, basic tshuva can lift it back up. But even after tshuva, that rishimu, that small trace imprint, remains. The act could be spiritually repaired, but because the body is involved, it leaves behind the subtle imprint which later requires purification. Then we moved on to the sinful behavior, real sin does much more than a weakness, a moment of, of weakness, or just temporary damage. It doesn't just lower the neutral energy, it gives strength to the side that opposes holiness. Weaponizing giving weapons to the enemy to then fight all the good forces. And that trapped energy normally remains there until the times of Mashiach, when the evil itself, the enemy, will disappear, so we can go back and collect those tools. There is one great exception, is that through Teshuvah Me'ava, returning to Hashem with deep love, then even those sins can be transformed into merits, into mitzvot, not because that act in and of itself was a good act, but because the very distance that was caused because of that act, it generates a closeness, a much more intense and deeper closeness with Hashem than was ever before. We'll conclude there.
The trapped energy, does